I have been super excited to sink my teeth into this horror series. With the soon-to-be released Little Nightmares 3, it only felt right to revisit the previous titles and break down the story of this gloomy world. So without further ado, let's get into it. We begin in a nightmare of a woman in robes slowly turning to face us, waking up our little protagonist. Our raincoat friend here is 6, a young girl that was sleeping in a suitcase, by the way, just to put into perspective the size scale. We even have these little white triangle guys, which are called gnomes. It's N-O-M-E-S. Don't know what the G did to get expelled from the word there, but the more you know. We can see that the surrounding area is dark, gloomy, wet, and quite honestly, miserable looking. And you could be forgiven for thinking that we're currently in some dark alleyway somewhere, but we have some subtle clues early on to show exactly where we are. The doors, mixed with subtle swaying of the camera as you move throughout, show that this is not a stationary location. We are currently on a ship. We find a bedroom, built for a person much larger than ourselves. Odd choice using chairs as chandeliers and a comically long shelf. Still doesn't look like a great place to live though, to be honest. Leaks in the roof, no blankets. Still better than a briefcase, I suppose. We run across an individual that has decided to depart these rough living quarters, and even see a letter left below him. What's interesting about this particular individual is that he shows up via a painting in the iOS and Android game Very Little Nightmares. It could just be a nod, and if the mobile game is even considered canon is questionable, but it's worth mentioning. We continue to move throughout the ship, stumbling across more gnomes that are very skittish, running at the mere sight of us. After taking a tumble down into a pool of some kind of black substance, likely oil since we are on a ship after all, we get a glimpse of some leeches. What is the most disturbing thing is that these things are the same size as us. I can't even express how disturbing the idea is of being the same size as a leech. This world is the worst. It's official. We get a glimpse at the sheer scale of this vessel, as well as a blindfolded and long-armed individual dragging a cage behind him with a large eye protruding from the wall, watching over him. On another note, 6 is the size of 2 toilet rolls. Crucial to the story? No, but something I think was worth mentioning. Next to the toilet area, we find a room filled with children's toys, swings, blocks, and a moving train. A crashed train. Next to that same children's room are locked doors that look like prison cells. Oh god. We see another giant eye that acts as some kind of security precaution, likely used to prevent prisoners escaping and people from entering. We see around the surrounding area small ash-like statues of previous children that were seen by the eye and unable to get away from it. It seems to act a bit like Medusa. If you're caught in its sights for long enough, you turn into a statue. But interestingly, it doesn't affect that long-armed individual from earlier. We see a little gnome friend nearby, and we take the time to enter a secret side room. First things first, time to give this little fella a hug, since existing in this horrible place is hard enough. Secondly, he seems to be looking at a drawing, showing other gnomes. I have an enlarged version here so it's easier to see. I for one think that they look very dashing. There is another hidden room upstairs off the beaten track, a small room with a single bed in the corner, children's drawings scattered across the floor, and that same black oil-like substance is seeping from underneath the bed. A child has used the substance to leave handprints, and a large drawing of one of the eyes watching creepily over the bed where they would be sleeping. We continue on as the blindfolded man from earlier arrives. He is commonly described by the nickname the Janitor, but interestingly, he actually has a name tag on his person, and his actual name is Roger. This room is filled with beds, with children laying atop them. It's hard to tell if they're actually sleeping or they're just too scared to move while the janitor's in there with them. We waste no time and leave the children's bedroom, but we are quickly overcome with hunger pains as 6's stomach begins grumbling. On the other side of the grates is a cafeteria with a single child eating alone. They see us struggling with hunger and help us by giving us their last piece of bread. After regaining our strength, we can continue while the child that helps us curls up into a ball. It's amazing that despite how miserable that kid might be, they still looked out for another hungry child. That's a strong message. We come across a large room filled with small cages, much like the ones that we saw the janitor dragging earlier. Considering the sheer size difference between children and adults here on the ship, you would have to assume that these cages could only be used to contain children or gnomes. A scary thought when you see the sheer amount of these things, and why would you need to cage them? We see more statues as we pass another area guarded by an eye, as we see more of the cages, now left dangling in the enormous open spaces, hopefully empty. A guy can wish. If you think things couldn't get creepier, you would be dead wrong. We find a secret room thanks to a gnome running towards it, hidden inside of a wardrobe. It only opens when placing a chair on a specified spot. marked with the black ooze. Inside the room, we can press a button that shows us a direct camera feed of the children's sleeping room, with this room being used as surveillance, and also shaped like an eye, which would line up with the eyes essentially being security cameras, only with Medusa-like powers, I guess. Atop the large staircase, we enter a room that is significantly nicer than anything that we've seen yet, a clearly upper class part of the ship. The pictures on the wall suggest to me that it likely belongs to the janitor. His choice of bed, however, is questionable. Why does it have straps? The secret door also doesn't help with my concern. The hunger pains strike again, as we can see how famished 6 actually is, starving for food and having to resort to a piece of meat that was being eaten by rats. It is, however, inside of a cage, and that, my friend, is a trap. We reawaken inside of a room of cages, filled with children as the janitor pulls one of them away. We manage to break out after toppling over our cage and finding the janitor wrapping up the kid in a cloth like a package. We can see the entire tub filled with these packages. You might be wondering why he's doing all of this. Well, we'll get some clues as to what it might be shortly. There is even a room filled with thousands of shoes, and a shoe creature that swims around like a great white shark, looking for any living thing that falls into this leather hellhole. This ship even has shoe sharks. It's crazy over here. Next door, we can even see dead rats strung up on pipes. This seems to be the janitor's pastime as he reappears, graciously, but unknowingly, giving us a ride and a lift. This takes us to the janitor's toy shop, filled with toys built for the children that he oversees. A few things about the janitor worth noting. Firstly, he seems very fond of spoons for some reason. Don't know why, but I sure as hell haven't held a spoon like that before. He is also clearly blind, as the blindfold might suggest, and he creates clicking noises as he walks around, using almost an echolocation to find his targets. The sheer wingspan on Roger is insane, but with bookshelves this tall, it's probably necessary. We find a television that we use to distract the janitor. It shows a cooking show with a woman. She sings a childlike jingle, but there aren't actually any real words being said. It's very creepy, and it reminds me of the old black and white 1930s cartoons, but absolutely cursed. We continue getting followed by the janitor, in the vents and in the hallways, until it leads us to another room that is partially closed, but the door is being held up by a cage. It's too far down for the janitor to actually follow us in, but thanks to his supernatural wingspan, he continues to feel around for us. We pull apart the cage holding up the door, weakening it while his arms are still under the door, and that has got to suck. Dude just lost his greatest asset, and his only chance of playing in the NBA. We continue upwards, finding more hooks that are transporting wrapped up packages. Unfortunately, more likely than not children. We also see a new guy dressed in a chef's uniform, meaning that these wrapped up kids are being transported to the kitchen area of the ship. The pile is ridiculously large, but 6 has been getting hungry once again. Out of pure desperation, she begins eating a rat that was trapped. We head into the kitchen, which is filled to the brim with meat, sausages and fish. Our rotund chef friend here is working hard getting the food going in the kitchen, and isn't a fan of us running around. I will say, it is quite comforting to see that there's a lot of fish hanging up, meaning that all of the meat isn't just kids like we saw earlier with the janitor. We enter a bedroom with another of the chefs sleeping. Having a painting of a toilet hung up is a very interesting choice, not to mention the creepy self-portrait above the bed, which is something only serial killers do. And what's worse than a serial killer? 2 serial killers. These ones are on dishes duty, and they must be feeding thousands of people to have dishes piled up this high. Not to mention they could probably use another 10 employees, since these two seem way behind. We narrowly escape the chefs using the food line to help us once again. This leads us outside, and we can see the outside of the ship. There is also another ship, anchored near our one, and hundreds of passengers are boarding from it. These guests are all, well nourished, should I say. A stark comparison to 6 and the other children that we've seen so far. The boat is literally rocking with each footstep as they enter the restaurant. We also see a familiar glimpse of the same woman from 6's dream at the beginning of our journey, watching over the guests. The guests are feasting on absurd amounts of food, all meat as well, not a vegetable in sight. But interestingly, they will completely forget their food when they see us, opting instead to try and grab us for their meal. It does make you wonder if the favourite meal of these guests is the children, since they openly ignore the food in front of them to chase us. Not to mention, it would also explain why the janitor was doing what he was doing earlier, packing them and then sending them down the food line. It also contrasts the children's situation absurdly, with 6 constantly having stomach pains and is clearly malnourished and desperate for food, and the children that we've seen so far don't seem much better. But these guests who are gluttonous, having access to huge amounts of food, far more than they could ever need, yet they consume it anyway. We find another gnome nearby and give him a customary hug. Honestly, these little guys are the only bright light in this world that I have seen so far. Some parkour over guests and we find a nearby bathroom. You see that big panel of glass? Well, if you break it, we can find a hidden room behind it, with a chair, so somebody can watch whoever's in the bathroom. Somehow it gets worse. There are nearby rooms containing the guests who are now wearing masks. When they chase us, by the way, they have become like a single entity. A literal amalgamation of gluttony. It's like the worst zombie horde you could have ever thought of. One of them does get sent flying down 5 stories, however, which is hilarious. I give her a 9 out of 10 for form. The hunger begins to kick in again, but thankfully one of the little gnome guys notices and holds out a sausage for us to eat. They are actually the best. Oh god, no, dude! Oh, I don't think I've been this sad in a horror game for a long time. The little guy was literally trying to help us and he got eaten for it. God damn it. We see that same woman from earlier, heading up an elevator with a familiar eye design on it. After following her up, we are now within her residence. Her walls are covered in paintings of eyes and guests and children alike. We find the lady looking into a broken mirror while humming to herself. We need to sneak past her slowly to retrieve a key that unlocks a dark room filled with mannequins. The lady chases us through these rooms, moving more like a supernatural spirit rather than a flesh and bone human. In the final room, we see numerous broken mirrors, except for one. We take this with us, and we use it against the lady when she appears, shining a mysterious light that appears towards her. She is damaged by the light and the reflection. Coincidentally, it takes 6 attempts before she falls to the ground. The stomach pains begin again, as 6 decides to bite into the lady for her meal. A shadow force begins circling 6, as we now walk towards the exit through the guest-filled restaurant. However, this time, when any guest shows any interest in 6, the new force reaches out, draining the life force from the surrounding guests. The door now opens up for us, as she is now able to head towards the exit. Our little gnome friends watch on as she does. That technically ends the story of Little Nightmares 1, but we need to provide some much needed context. Firstly, the ship that the story takes place on isn't actually a ship. Well, not in the way that we think of it anyway. It's called the Maw, an eatery on the ocean, which was operated by the lady until she became a meal herself, and frequently visited by the guests that we see stuffing their face in the restaurants. We also know from information shared in the Sounds of Nightmares podcast that numerous areas within the world are actually living entities. There is a strong theory that the Maw is one of these places. It is described as creeping and crawling, waiting for the next batch of guests to arrive. Not to mention, that mysterious light that aided us in our fight against the lady is actually theorized to have been produced by the eyes that we saw throughout our journey, the eyes of the Maw. It was actually described in the podcast that the light produced from the eyes were as intense as the glare of the sun. With that being said, we are far from done. We have 3 DLCs and some comic book entries to cover. We'll start with the comic books, released in 2017. Some things of note. This was a comic book run that was meant to have 4 different issues, but the 3rd and 4th issues were actually cancelled. So it's technically an unfinished run. Also, there is a lot of speculation on whether these things are even canon to the story, so take them with a grain of salt, but it's worth covering nonetheless. The first issue depicts numerous events that took place on our journey, such as escaping the kitchen from the chef, but there are also other things that didn't happen, such as 6 finding a group of children surrounding a fire. They tell 6 that she doesn't belong here, and asks what she has seen. She describes the guests, bulging chests filled with secrets with shadows forever at your heels that bring you here to the Maw. We see the young child that gifted us bread, asking 6 what the last thing she remembers is, saying that if she doesn't tell them, she is sure to forget altogether. Since these little things like memories never last forever, not here in the lair of the Janitor. A leech disrupts the party, and actually eats one of the kids sitting around the fire, as 6 thinks about the light. See, in the light, you see things that you try to escape, so you leap back into the darkness where hope fades just like the memories. You're left with nothing but stories, because stories don't hurt. 6 wonders what the lady is hiding and what she has seen, as she is now being taken into the Maw from the same figure that we saw earlier within the shadows. Sometimes you see too much, but the other children are willing to help her remember. But 6 doesn't want to remember. Sometimes memories are best locked away out of reach where they belong. Another child mentions their story. He talks about how they are given charms at birth where he is from. They're meant to protect the children of the village from the north wind. However, one winter, the charms did nothing. Only 2 children survived, but the north wind gave them no rest. The children ran, with the north wind at their heels, alone, unwanted, even as years passed them by, until one day they couldn't run anymore, and they decided to hold up in shelter. But the north wind cannot be outrun. The boy was not scared of death, and yelled back to leave them alone, but the north wind didn't listen, saying that there's no fun in that. Besides, they would lose the wager, even though its adversary is a bit of a cheat. This confuses the young boy, as the north wind asks them if they're tired of running, tired of hiding. It continues to mock the boy, with him saying that he cannot give up for his sister. It tells him that there is something that he must see, asking him to step outside just for a moment. No tricks. His sister pleads for him to not go outside, but when he does, the north wind shows him his sister's corpse, stating that she has been theirs for a long time now. We see the young girl transform from behind the boy. It was never his sister, but that creature again. He reaches a hand out as the north wind yells out that it was so close. A deal was struck. Shelter, warmth, where the little things like him could hide away, safe from harm. We now move on to the second issue, as 6 brings the children a music box that she found in the janitor's belongings, until one of them smashes it, telling them that they know nothing, but they soon will. We see 3 children entering a house. One of the children, a young girl, warns them that they shouldn't go inside. Monsters are real after all. No, you shouldn't believe in children's stories and tales that the others tell her. There's nothing to be afraid of if they stick together. The house was impressive, as giant mirrors were covered by cloth. The children laugh at the silly reflections, making them appear much taller than they actually are. He wonders what it would be like if he was actually this tall. He would protect creatures, he would play with unhappy children and rescue lost things. The curiosity of the children causes them to see what the other mirrors would make them look like, and they pull away the cloth. The same child shares her fears again with the group, telling them to stop. The mirror makes him look strong. He could lift the biggest rocks, build real castles on the beach instead of sand castles, and he would never be bullied again. What if there were 2 of him? All of his chores would be done quickly, he would never have to play on his own, and someone would always watch his back. The scared girl hides her eyes. The mirrors talk too much, just like her friends, but it's important to have courage to fit in when fear makes more sense. The other children laugh, asking if she saw a monster, but the children are now just like their reflections. One is tall, one is strong, and one has a duplicate of himself. Until something comes out from the mirror, grabbing the strong child and pulling him into it. The children run in fear, but aren't able to exit the same way that they did before since they don't fit with their new shapes. They wonder, if the mirrors change them, then maybe they could change them back. They take a look at the mirror again and can see their old version inside, but one of the 2 is grabbed and pulled into the mirror. The remaining child isn't able to form words. He's now only half the person that he once was. The scared child has a plan, however. They must move the mirrors without them seeing them. Face the mirrors at each other until the monster shows up and then you smash it. It seems to work until they notice that the scared child is now stuck in the shards. They cover the glass, thanking her for saving them both, but promise to come back and to save her too. They will go and get help, but they never did. Why have courage when fear makes more sense? The creature arrives again, taking the scared child and ending up here at the moor. She is now mostly alive, but will never look into another mirror again, since you never know what will look back. That covers the 2 2017 comics. Let's get into a little more context. The individual I called the creature is actually called the ferryman. It is implied that the ferryman is working closely with the lady, tasked with hunting down children and bringing them to the moor, likely to then be eaten by the guests. He's shown to be able to shapeshift, pretending to be the child's dead sister for years presumably, and he is also the one that made the deal with the North Wind entity that was briefly mentioned. His role goes a little bit more beyond that, but we'll get more into that in the future titles of Little Nightmares. Onto the DLC. We start with the secrets of the Maw DLC, as we now take on the role of one of the young children, sleeping in the room that we saw earlier as 6. We leave the bedroom and see the janitor grabbing another of the escaped children. We are now inside one of the prisons, with a painting of a boat on the wall above the previous room that we saw earlier, with the eye watching over the bed. This time we are heading in the opposite direction that 6 went, back through the toy room, the toilet, and to find another child using blankets as a rope to escape. This same blanket rope was used by 6, which shows that these events are actually taking place earlier than what we just saw. However, this time we fall down a hole that leads to the lower portions of the moor. Filled with leeches and flooded rooms, one of these rooms contains something swimming in the water that will chase the young boy and attempt to pull him into the depths. This thing is not much of a fish or a shark, but it's actually a humanoid with hands and arms. There are even hanging bags with a kid's arm coming out of it. It's a rough place to say the least. The ship contains numerous rooms that are able to be flooded with opening vents and a functioning pipe system. We can also see this aquatic menace with our own 2 eyes, and dear God, I wish I hadn't. This is an entity called the Granny, by the way. She is actually very similar to the shoe creature that we saw with 6, but we can actually see the Granny, unlike the shoe creature. It resembles an old woman with elongated arms and legs and a sagging neck. We give her a prime example of why toasters should never be used near a bath, especially if you're in it, since it normally will end pretty badly. We head back towards the surface after being in the lower portions of the moor for a while, after finally killing the Granny. But once we reach the top, we're grabbed by the Janitor, and we cut to see that the child that we just played is sitting caged, with 6 caged nearby. This is the same kid that we saw dragged away earlier and packaged on the table as 6. We now jump into the Hideaway DLC, as the young boy is now escaping the wrapping that the Janitor put him in, but falls down into a coal pile when it rips. Some nearby friendly gnomes show up and check on the boy, but quickly run off. We do find these little suckers, however, and we give them hugs, since that's what all gnomes deserve. They will now help us open doors that we can't reach, pull things that we're not strong enough to do ourselves, and push things that are too heavy for us. They are simply the best, really. All it takes is a hug. This area gives us a glimpse of the industrial aspect of the moor, and how this big vessel manages to operate. It contains a giant coal furnace, with buckets that move towards the upper floors. We will need to get the coal furnace operating at full capacity to ride it to freedom. That's where our gnome friends come into play, helping us by filling the coal furnace with fuel. But we need more helpers. In our search for friends, we find the Janitor in his workshop. We turn on his power saw to keep his attention as we fall into his trash compactor. It's filled with dolls and toys that he clearly wasn't happy with, but it also contains more gnomes, locked away in glass jars and hiding in fields of coal. But a few hugs later and we get their help and we get the hell out of there, ending with them helping with the furnace. We now head into the eastern corridor, which is pitch black darkness, and the Janitor continues to roam around. It isn't long before we find more gnomes and can even see some of them drawing on pieces of paper. It seems that it actually could have been the gnomes leaving the drawings everywhere, not the children. We escort them back to the furnace and begin our ascent upstairs thanks to the hard work of our gnome army. They do join us upstairs, however, as they all collect themselves around the heat of a fireplace above. We are not done, and we continue until we're atop a lift carrying the lady inside. Into the Residence DLC, as we now get a larger glimpse of the lady's home. It is filled with pictures of herself and statues that resemble her. Pretty vain if you ask me, but what do I know? She is seen once again standing before a broken mirror surrounded by creepy porcelain dolls, since why not? Might as well make it even creepier. And also, might as well have another self-portrait at the base of your staircase. You can never have enough. There's actually a nice collection of different yet horrifying pictures on one of the walls. They contain numerous depictions of children, herself, guests, gnomes, and even one that appears to be the ferryman, showing her connection to him. Throughout the residence there are statues that must be collected and placed to unlock a secret door, but it causes the lights to go out, and we see glimpses of shadow-like children that will attack us on sight. Thankfully we have a flashlight, and we all know that a shadow's biggest weakness is a flashlight. We eventually find the lady again, but this time she is standing in front of an actual mirror. Her reflection, however, is a stark contrast to her outward image. She oddly resembles Granny, in fact. We attempt to escape, but she manages to catch us using her powers on the young boy. We can see the boy has now been changed into a gnome. A sad reveal that the gnome friends that we've found throughout are actually children, turned by the lady into these little creatures. We wander back through the restaurant, but none of the guests pay us any mind, eventually wandering into a room with another gnome and a single sausage on the floor, revealing that we are actually the gnome that Six stumbles across, the one that offered her the meal when she was hungry, and unfortunately was killed when she decided to eat him instead. A tragic story to end off the video. If you made it to the end, please put gnomes in the comments down below so I can see. I really appreciate you guys tagging along as always. And remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe consider subscribing if you want to see more lore explained videos in the future. I will be covering Little Nightmares 2, and of course the soon to be released Little Nightmares 3 over the next week, and maybe even a timeline or a series video for Little Nightmares as well, so there's a lot to look forward to. Thanks again guys, until next time, peace.